This is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like at the beginning of 2008. Rampage Jackson had just won the title with a knockout over Chuck Liddell and defended his title against Dan Henderson. So today we're going to take a look at how the unofficial MMA light heavyweight rankings changed from 2008 until 2013 when the official UFC rankings were implemented. So let's check it out. Here are the light heavyweight rankings starting in 2008. Here we go. We start things off with a middleweight fight as Dan Henderson was submitted by Anderson Silva, moving himself down 3 spots. SENGOKU got a TKO win over Nakamura. Then Thiago Silva submitted Antonio Mendez, moving Thiago Silva into the top 10. Vanderlei Silva knocked out Keith Jardine, moving Vanderlei up 2 spots. And then Lyoto Machida got a decision win over Tito Ortiz, moving Machida into the number 2 spot. Dan Henderson then officially moved to middleweight, taking him off of the light heavyweight rankings. Forrest Griffin got a decision win over Rampage Jackson to win the UFC light heavyweight championship. Rashad Evans then knocked out Chuck Liddell, a shocking KO, moving Evans up 4 spots. Shogun then got an injury that needed surgery, moving himself 3 spots down to number 9. Louise Kane then TKO'd SENGOKU. SENGOKU is now out of the top 10 rankings. Keith Jardine then got a decision win over Brandon Vera. Lil Na got a decision win over Moise Rimbon, keeping himself at number 10. Rampage Jackson then knocked out Vanderlei Silva. That didn't change anything in the rankings though. But what did change things is Rashad Evans TKO'd the champion Forrest Griffin. Rashad Evans moves into the number 1 spot. And at the end of 2008, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. As you saw, a lot of changes in the top 5, with Forrest Griffin becoming champion and then losing it to Rashad Evans at the very end of the year. We also saw Chuck Liddell drop to number 5, Shogun drop down to number 9, Thiago Silva make it into the top 10. A good amount of change, especially in the top 5 of the light heavyweight rankings. To begin 2009, Shogun got a TKO win over Mark Coleman. And then Lil Nog knocked out Vladimir Matyushenko at Affliction Day of Reckoning. And then our first change of 2009, Machida knocked out Thiago Silva at the Horn. Machida moves up to number 3. Rampage Jackson got a decision win over Keith Jardine. Mauricio Shogun Rua TKO's Chuck Liddell. Liddell now number 10, and Shogun moves into the top 5. Louise Kane got a decision win over Steve Cantwell, moving him into the top 10. Lil Nog then got a submission win over Dion Starring. And then the Machida era begins as Lyoto Machida knocks out Rashad Evans to win the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. Rich Franklin gets a decision win over Vanderlei Silva, knocking Vanderlei off of the top 10 rankings. Anderson Silva knocks out Forrest Griffin, moving the middleweight champion into the number 9 spot at light heavyweight. Then Gegard Mousasi knocks out Babalu. That puts Mousasi in at number 7 in the light heavyweight rankings. Thiago Silva KOs Keith Jardine. Jardine out of the rankings. Thiago Silva back in the rankings. Machida then gets a very controversial decision win over Shogun Rua. Even though he lost, Shogun moves up 2 spots. Gegard Mousasi TKO SENGOKU to keep his spot at number 6. Randy the Natural Couture gets a decision win over Brandon Vera, making his way into the top 10. Then Lil Nog knocks out Louise Kane. That moves him up 2 spots to number 6. Forrest Griffin gets a decision win over Tito Ortiz. And then Gegard Mousasi finishes the year with a TKO victory over Gary Goodridge, moving him up 1 spot. And at the end of 2009, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. The big change, Lyoto Machida becomes champion and then defends his title in a controversial win, which pushes Shogun up the rankings. We also had a lot of guys fall off the rankings: Keith Jardine, Chuck Liddell, Vanderlei Silva. Meanwhile, Mousasi, Thiago Silva, Anderson Silva, and even Randy Couture made it into the top 10. Now, before we move on to 2010, if you could please go down and like the video. The support really helps. And we've got the middleweight video coming out next, so to get that video, make sure to subscribe to SBN MMA. Alright, now let's go into 2010. To start off 2010, Rashad Evans got a decision win over Thiago Silva, moving Silva down 1 spot. A random shuffle then put Anderson Silva one spot ahead of Nogueira. Anderson Silva then defended his middleweight title, getting a decision win over Damian Maia. King Mo then got a decision win over Gegard Mousasi, moving King Mo into the top 10 at number 8. Shogun Rua this time around knocked out Lyoto Machida. He is now the UFC light heavyweight champion. Little Nog got a decision win over Jason Brills. Rashad Evans got a decision win over Rampage Jackson in a highly anticipated fight. Mousasi submitted Jake O'Brien, moving himself up one more spot. Jon Jones then TKO'd Vladimir Matyushenko to make his top 10 debut. Anderson Silva continued to fight at middleweight, this time submitting Chael Sonnen, dropping him 3 spots at light heavyweight. Fei Zhao then TKO'd King Mo, taking King Mo off of the top 10 rankings. Ryan Bader got a decision win over Little Nog. Bader makes his debut in the top 10 all the way up at number 6. Rampage Jackson got a decision win over Lyoto Machida, moving Machida down 2 spots and Jackson into number 3. Anderson Silva is then taken off of the light heavyweight rankings as he is staying at middleweight. And at the end of 2010, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. Shogun this time seals the rematch against Lyoto Machida, becoming champion in 2010, but he has some tough tests ahead of him. We have Ryan Bader and Jon Jones, the newcomers, the young blood in the division, going up to number 6 and number 7 at light heavyweight. Let's see if either fighter can make a major move in 2011. To start off 2011, Thiago Silva got a decision win over Brandon Vera, which later was overturned, but for now, Silva moves up 2 spots. A random shuffle puts Fei Zhao 1 spot ahead of Gegard Mousasi, moving him into the top 10. Forrest Griffin then got a decision win over Rich Franklin, which didn't change anything. Jon Jones then submits Ryan Bader to move up to number 5 and earn himself a title shot. Dan Henderson back at light heavyweight TKO's Fei Zhao to move himself all the way up to number 8. Jon Jones then TKO's Shogun. Jon Jones is now your UFC light heavyweight champion. Phil Davis then gets a decision win over Lil Nog, making his top 10 debut at number 9. Lyoto Machida then knocks out Randy Couture with a crane kick. I was actually there in person, my first ever UFC event, UFC 129 in Toronto. Rampage Jackson then gets a decision win over Matt Hamill to move up to number 3. Tito Ortiz submits Ryan Bader in a shocker. That takes Ryan Bader off of the top 10 light heavyweight rankings. Mousasi then TKO's Hiroshi Izumi, making his way back into the top 10 at number 9. Dan Henderson then TKO's Fedor Emelianenko at heavyweight. That doesn't change anything though at light heavyweight. Rashad Evans then TKO's Tito Ortiz. That moves Evans up to number 2. Shogun Rua then KO's Forrest Griffin, taking back that number 2 ranking. Fei Zhao then KO's Yoel Romero to swap places with Mousasi. Jon Jones defends his title for the first time, submitting Rampage Jackson. Dan Henderson got a decision win over Shogun in one of the greatest fights you'll ever see. Henderson is now at number 2. Meanwhile, Lil Nog gets a TKO win over Tito Ortiz, moving back into the top 10. Jon Jones gets his second title defense, this time submitting Lyoto Machida in another fight that I saw live. Gegard Mousasi gets a decision win over OSP, moving himself back into the top 10 yet again. And then to end off the year, Alexander Gustafsson TKO's Vladimir Matyushenko. Gustafsson makes his top 10 debut. And at the end of 2011, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. 2011, the year of Jon Jones. 4 wins at light heavyweight, 3 wins in title fights, just completely decimates the division. Meanwhile, Dan Henderson climbs up, rockets up the divisional rankings into the number 2 spot. Meanwhile, guys like Phil Davis and Alexander Gustafsson make their debuts in the top 10. Let's see if Jon Jones can remain dominant in 2012. To start off 2012, Rashad Evans gets a decision win over Phil Davis and a title shot against Jon Jones. Ryan Bader gets a decision win over Rampage Jackson to get back into the top 10 and Rampage all the way down to number 8. Gustafsson got a decision win over Thiago Silva, moving all the way up to number 7. Jon Jones defends his title yet again, getting a decision win over Rashad Evans. Forrest Griffin gets a decision win over Tito Ortiz. That win actually knocks him off of the top 10. Phil Davis and Wagner Prado get a no contest as Davis poked Prado in the eye. Lyoto Machida then knocks out Ryan Bader, moving up one spot to number 4. Shogun on the same night got a TKO win over Brandon Vera, but it wasn't as impressive as Machida's win. Jon Jones then was slated to fight Dan Henderson, but Henderson was injured and replaced by Vitor Belfort. Jon Jones submitted Vitor Belfort after nearly being submitted himself. Phil Davis then submits Prado in the rematch. That didn't change anything. To end off 2012, Gustafsson got a decision win over Shogun Rua, moving Gustafsson into the top 5. And at the end of 2012, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. To wrap things up and bring us to the official UFC rankings, Glover Teixeira got a decision win over Rampage Jackson, moving into the top 10 at number 7. Nogueira then got a decision win over Rashad Evans. That moved Nogueira all the way up to number 6. And in February 2013, right before the official UFC rankings came out, this is what the MMA light heavyweight rankings looked like. As we saw, 2012 was kind of a funny year. Jon Jones did defend his title a couple of times. Gustafsson rose up the rankings, but not a whole lot happened. But at the beginning of 2013, Glover Teixeira establishes himself as a top 10 light heavyweight, and Lil Nog gets a surprising upset over Rashad Evans. So in February 2013, Jon Jones is the man at light heavyweight as the UFC establishes their own rankings. Now Jon Jones, over the next couple of years, he has to overcome some of his own hurdles inside and outside of the octagon to see how he handled that and how the light heavyweight rankings changed from 2013 to now. Please click this video. Anyways, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the rankings.